Hi, everybody. First of all, let me also thank Irini and Sadia and Dimitris for being here and inviting me here. So I don't really have a paper to give you. There is my 2 cents in this small leaflet that we have written with Vasilis. It's not something very innovative. It's mostly a gathering of already existing data, trying to give a broad overview of the phenomenon in Greece and trying to deconstruct some myths. So it's not something very like academic. It's mostly an effort we're doing to give this data to like people who are not into academia. So I will not bother with presenting any of that. I just have some thoughts to share with you and to give another context of the whole situation in Greece. Uh, so I'll just take the line from Fivos and go a bit back because the first thing that I would like to give as context to people who are not from Greece is that this is not a new thing. So migration is not new in Greece. We haven't seen it in 2015 for the first time, of course. This was what we call in Greece the third wave of migration. So some things that I'm saying now, I'm quoting like public discourse and might be schematic, so it's up to discussion. I just want to give you a context of what's been discussed in Greece the past decades. So we say that this is kind of the third wave of migration. The first wave of migration was back in the 90s after the dissolvement of the Soviet Union and mostly Albanian people coming into Greece. Like back then, it was mostly economic migrants, but we didn't have a crisis, so we didn't talk about that a lot. We didn't care if they were economic migrants or refugees. So it was mostly Albanians and population from the ex-Soviet Union coming into Greece. So this was the first wave of migration in a Greek society that did have some small communities. Imagine that the first Filipino community in Greece exists in the 70s. So it's not something new, but 90s was the first time that we had, we saw on TV and this became a public issue, migration. The second wave of migration was in the zeros after the 9/11 can I say invasion? It's not politically correct. Well, the geopolitical, let's say, developments in the Middle East because of the post 9/11 war on terror. And Mytilene was also an epicenter of that back then. So, I mean, there was Pagani back then. The previous Moria was Pagani. There was a center for unaccompanied minor in Nayasos. There were people in the University of Mytilene students trying to organize, and some people were hosted beside the Mytilene student camp. Back then, a detention facility, because back then everything was a detention facility. There was not a reception system in Greece. The possibility of getting into having access to such a facility was something close to talking to the Pope. So nobody had access. Nobody, literally. Not MPs, not anybody had access. So it was a very difficult situation. And Pagani closed down after a very, very big fight of local community here and some of political, let's say, pressure from abroad as well. And this brings us to the third, let's say, wave of migration, which is the 2015. I'm saying that because I feel that, I don't know if Mytilene or Greece or any of us are victims of the geography. I mean, everybody's a victim of the geography in a way. Like we are all born somewhere. But I just have a sense that what's interesting for Greece and for the Greek borders is that it is a very good entry point to look to several parallels and to it's a mingle what's happening here. The territory is a key point in order to understand several dynamics across continents and regions. So I think it's in this sense it is very interesting, and I think that Sadia's idea of us meeting here is very key to that. What happened in 2015 from a, let's say, broader like context, not so much local, was more intense, both in terms of numbers and in terms of public reaction. So a lot of you might remember back in April 2015, like the images of small island being drawn in the shores and all this public reaction that this instigated. So the Syrian drama mostly brought the whole thing into the dialogue in Europe. So what did the Commission do? First of all, let me say that for me and for us working like in NGOs or activists or like that, one thing that, and because I'm talking also to academics and concepts is very important, there is no refugee crisis in Greece and there is no refugee crisis in Europe. Okay, I mean it's 1 to 2 million of people in a continent of 500 million people. So of course there's no refugee crisis in Europe. There's a reception crisis. There's a crisis of the rule of law. There's an existential crisis. We can discuss how to call this crisis, but this is not a refugee crisis that's rolling out in Europe. So what happened back in 2015 is that because of these images and this public discourse that was very focused on the refugee issue and the Syrian drama mostly, the European Commission came out in May 2015 announcing the European Agenda on Migration. So the European Agenda on Migration was what it said is that they would try to build a system based on solidarity among people and among member states in the EU. But what actually provisioned was the relocation program, which was the famous solidarity tool between member states, some small resettlement program, the hotspot approach, the infamous hotspot approach, which was actually the already existing reception centers, and we also brought Frontex, EASO, Europol, Eurojust, and a lot of good paid officials from the EU here. That was the whole idea. When the hotspot approach was presented to us, and I'm sorry I'm going back and forth now, but when the hotspot approach was presented to us, okay, so because of the Dublin regulation and because of the fact that the European law provisions that a person who enters in the European territory, for each person that enters in the European territory, the first country of entry is responsible for processing their asylum claim. That's the very basis of the Dublin regulation, which puts, of course, a lot of pressure in the frontline member states. Because of that, since the first Dublin regulation, we had this concept of first reception centers. So first reception centers were should be centers that were based in the frontline member states borders, so in the borders of Europe at the same time, that would process the asylum claims of people or would send them in the mainland to process their claims but their first registration would happen in the first reception centers. What happened with the hotspots in 2015 is that we took the first reception centers, renamed them as hotspots, because we wanted to bring into the whole idea of first reception the process of A, sending people back as soon as possible, B, European Commission and other bodies of the EU being present here while we process people. So the hotspot approach is the first reception, but when you come in, Frontex is there for the debriefing. Frontex is present when you get your Eurodac. Frontex is present when you file your asylum claim. EASO is there in the processing of your asylum claim. IOM is there. Sorry? EASO, the European Asylum Service. So there is a European Asylum Service that has a very central role right now, more and more central to the processing of the asylum claims in Moria, to an extent that there is an issue with accountability, because the public servants, who are the officers of the asylum service, have protested against the fact that there are other officials from other countries signing legal documentation of Greek origin, which is something that the Greek law cannot happen. So there are all sorts of issues arising that the Commission is with the Greek government, of course, are trying to bypass. IOM is there, the International Organization of Migration, to politely inform you about your possibility to return voluntarily to your country of origin. Okay, UNHCR is there. I mean, all NGOs. So what I want to what I'm trying to say here is that for people who have been working in the field for some years and had some idea of how this externalization of border control has rolled out in a region, reading the European agenda on migration was the sign that solidarity has finished before it even started. Because imagine a situation where you actually do some processing centers in your islands, and I'm talking before the EU Turkey deal now. I'm talking about the very first months of the European agenda on migration. May 2015. May 2015. So the European Commission comes out announcing a scheme by which people will be relocated after after they are processed in Greece and Italy, because Italy is also in the whole frame, passing a series of screenings. Some people, only Syrians and Iraqis. There will be a vetting in the embassy after the first screening. So I'm talking of a lot of layers that actually cancel the very big announcement about solidarity between member states. So just to cut a long story short, after 2 years and all of these thousands of millions of money spent, from 2015 until 2018, Europe has relocated from Greece the astronomical number of 22,000 people. That's what we're talking about, 22,000 people. This whole system has been set up in order to relocate 22,000 people. So, of course, and I mean, we have discussing about that last night. There was another solution. I mean, there has been there forever. It's called resettlement. If the Commission wanted to show, if the Europe wanted to show some kind of solidarity to these people first, they could go to Turkey, Jordan, and Lebanon, where there are at least 5 million of refugees residing, and they could just take people from there. Instead, they decided to do the first line thing in Greece because they wanted this first line buffering zone to be present. What, of course, is also understandable for us, but it was not understandable for the Commission, is that refugees know about all that. So the Commission announced the relocation scheme back in May 2015. They actually managed to arrange the quotas per country and the process and all the logistic things on September 2015. So the whole thing was actually signed in September 2015. And the Commission, for some reason, expected that all of a sudden people would stop walking and they would go, they would appear in the asylum service and said, I heard about relocation, I want to get in. And of course, this did not happen. Of course, because refugees are clever people. They have ended up like being alive in Athens, so they know how to get information. They don't trust the system. They know the system is complex, not trustworthy, so they kept walking. We were at the domain. If you were at the domain like in October 2015, when the Western Balkan route was still open, we were trying to inform people that there is also a process called relocation, and you can go there. Maybe we didn't know, of course, but maybe you can go to your country, the country you want, safely, with your ticket paid, without having to walk like 5 days, etc., without having to pay the smugglers. And people said, really? I'm gonna be in Germany in 4 days. Goodbye. So that was the reaction of refugees, which is totally understandable because we're talking about people. You don't move chairs. You're trying to move actual people. And sorry, I'm being a bit blunt here, and I start to get.
That's why you're here.
Yeah, I started to get even more pissed as I narrate the whole thing. So apologies for the bluntness, but it's like putting all this in line is like in my head. So yeah, people walked, and this I believe that this is when the Commission realized that the Dublin regulation has actually collapsed. So it has actually collapsed. We could not make the thing work with the Dublin regulation. People, for some reason, are not persuaded that we're good and we want to get them somewhere safely. So the whole process of closing down the Western Balkan route started. What is interesting is that between the September 2015 and the signing of what we know as EU-Turkey deal, there were a lot of processes. So it's not, we didn't get there like in one day. Just a month after the signing of the relocation project, when the states saw that this did not work and people continued to walk through the Western Balkan route, the Western Balkan Summit was summoned. So the Western Balkan Summit was summoned by Germany. It included all the countries along the Western Balkan route. Turkey was also invited, and France was also invited. And they took some decisions there. I'm saying that because in terms of European politics, imagine that you have an institutional body voting, the European Parliament, which we have voted, and the ministers of interior, which also are from governments that we have voted for, taking a certain decision in September 2015. And in October 2015, just a month after, the Commission bypasses this whole process, convenes another summit that includes some of the Schengen countries and some of the non-Schengen countries, along with Turkey, to take decisions that circumvent the previous decisions that they had already taken. So, and this was, of course, on an institutional level, the beginning of the end of the whole thing. So, of course, the borders, the Western Balkan route borders, did not close overnight. Since November 2015, I think it was late 2015, that the two police forces, like our force and Northern Macedonian force, which is very nice that I can say Northern Macedonia now, because until 2 months ago it was the name with the country with no name, the Northern Macedonia forces, had a kind of agreement, of course, with the advisement of the Commission, like in its step, to let people live in certain groups. In November 2015, they put a bar to everybody who was not either from Syria, Iraq, or Afghanistan. So everybody else was out, stuck in Idomeni. Then they had started putting number quotas. So it was Syria, Iraq, and Afghanistan, but only 100 people per day, for example. So people were getting a stamp in the paper that they had taken from Mytilene, and they had a stamp that you are number 44 and you're passing like the day after. Then it was not Afghanistan, then it was not Iraq, then it was just a few Syrians, and at the end, around February 2016, the borders closed down whatsoever, and on 18 March 2016, the infamous EU-Turkey deal came into force. Just a few words about that. First, what was new with the EU-Turkey deal in terms of legislation? Nothing. There was already a readmission, Greece-Turkey readmission protocol back from 2001. There was an EU-Turkey readmission protocol that would come into force in 2016. These protocols, along with the Dublin regulation and the Schengen regulation, provide that for each person that comes into Greece, the Greek Asylum Service can can look into the possibility of him or her being returned to Turkey, as Turkey being a safe third country for him or her. So the whole legislation was already there. What happened with the EU-Turkey deal is that there was a statement, a political statement, a message that this is enough. We will not take any more. And I'm saying that because at the end of the day, the EU-Turkey statement, I mean, the legal repercussion that this document has, I mean, the legal standing, it's a press release. That's what it is. And it's very interesting. I will just quote, if I may, just a paragraph. 2 years ago, 2 people from Pakistan and 1 person from Afghanistan went to the European court, to the Court of Europe, so the Luxembourg court, not the Strasbourg court, to challenge the legality of the EU-Turkey deal. So they said that they cannot be returned under the EU-Turkey deal because the EU-Turkey deal is not legal according to the instruments of Europe. And the court decision came out in February 2017 saying, and I quote, "The General Court declares that it lacks jurisdiction to hear and determine actions brought by 3 asylum seekers against the EU-Turkey statement." And I quote, sorry, but this is very, very interesting. It has an analysis, a 2-pager, I can send it to everybody. It has an analysis on how the whole thing was actually signed. And at the end, it concludes, "The court therefore considers that neither the European Council nor any other institution of the EU decided to conclude an agreement with the Turkish government on the subject of the migration crisis. In the absence of any act of an institution of the EU, the legality of which could review under the article of the convention, the court declares that it lacks jurisdiction to hear and determine the actions brought by 3 asylum seekers." So what they actually say here is that the European leaders had a council, there was a European Council on the 17th of March of 2016, and while they were finishing their council, they got outside of the room, Davutoglu was passing by, and all of a sudden they say, "Hey, Ahmed, do you want to have a beer and sign a prejudice on the EU-Turkey statement?" So this is a statement that, according to the European Court, is a statement not signed by any institutional body of the EU, and still its implementation is financed by the EU, by the taxpayer, the European taxpayers' money. And at the same time, the Commission has no liability and nothing to do with it. So I'm saying that because I think, and this is not only me thinking, of course. I mean, a lot of people that have a long time before me have studied this whole process of externalization of border management. These are all fundamental moments of how EU bypasses its own institution and its own accountability and liability mechanisms in order to be able to further externalize border control. So, trying to wrap up because I think I'm talking too much and I'm sorry about that. I just want to leave room to discussion. So where are we now? The EU-Turkey deal is not working, of course. Since 2006, from 2006, the April of 2016, until I think February or the last stats, the number of people that have actually been returned to Turkey under the EU-Turkey deal, which parenthesis, when a person is issued a return order, when they say, it's a legal document, so they say in view of, they quote all 3 documents, the Greek-Turkey Readmission Protocol, the EU-Turkey Readmission Protocol, and the EU-Turkey statement, because they actually don't know under which protocol they're actually being returned. But still, the number of people that have been returned to Turkey under this agreement adds up to, and I just looked at the last stats from February 2019, 1,838 people. So this is, where the taxpayers' money are going. Even from a blunt, cynical point of view, it's not working. I believe, and with Vasilis that we have written this little text, believe that it was not, as I said, it was mostly about the message. And what I was thinking about what you said yesterday, I have this feeling, and I've talked a lot with Sadi about that how the Commission and of course other countries and other territories of the world manage funding. It's a tool of biopolitics when it comes to migration management. So the same time at the same time that the Home Affairs Minister, if I'm not mistaken, of Australia came out 2 days ago saying that they will renew the contract for services of security services in I think Manus Island, which adds up to something like $500 million for a company without tendering process, for a company that is actually registered in a shaft somewhere. So this happens at the same time that people cannot have paracetamol and cannot have access to a dentist. This happens, for example, that literally yesterday I was talking 1 hour on the phone trying to find a solution about 300 pairs of shoes for unaccompanied minors in a detention facility we're working in. At the same time, if you go to Mytilene, there are 2 boats of Frontex with very, very well-paid officials there. So I think it's all about the message that goes out, and the message is, don't come here, we will make your life hell. This is why the conditions are so bad. What happened with Europe is that Europe is very okay with what's happening in Greece. They know that the conditions are like dire here. They know it. And it suits them because they have created, along with the Greek government, of course, which has its own responsibility, a condition where at the same time they can say that we have made some, like, somehow the reception conditions in the mainland in Greece better for asylum seekers, so we can resume Dublin returns to Greece, because that was the main issue. Parenthesis, the Dublin returns were postponed from European countries to Greece after a Dublin return is that because, sorry, I think I'm talking too much, I'm sorry guys. So because Dublin, the very premise, because the central premise of the Dublin regulation is that for each person that gets into Europe, the first the country that is responsible for processing their asylum claim is the first country they enter. When a person that has previously been registered to Greece, in Greece, is found in Germany, Germany has a right to return them back to Greece because their asylum claim has to be processed there. Yeah, and Greeks forever. So in 2013, there was a conviction of Greece from the Court of Strasbourg, from the European Court of Human Rights. It's called the MSS versus Dublin and Greece decision. So there was an Afghani guy who came into Greece and he was beaten up by, we had also Golden Dawn militia back then. So we have all sorts of problems. So he was homeless. He didn't have any kind of reception system. He was also beaten up by neo-Nazis in the city center of Athens. He managed to live illegally to Germany, to Brussels, to Belgium. To Belgium. He was apprehended there. The Eurodac system showed that he had previously been registered to Greece, so he was returned back to Greece. He was homeless again. He got beaten again in the street. And at some point, he went to the European Court for Human Rights, which convicted both Brussels and Greece. Brussels because they had returned a person to a country which is not safe for him. So, yeah. And Greece because of the conditions that tantamount to degrading and inhuman treatment according to the Article 3 of the Convention. So after 2013, most European countries had postponed returns to Greece, and Greece was obliged to do an action plan in order to amend these reception conditions in order for the other countries to be able to return people back through the Dublin regulation. So this was also enforced when the whole 2015 thing happened. So there are a lot of layers of policy there and cynicism and blackmailing to states to states and from states. So I was saying that because what the Commission really wanted through Greece is, one, create a reality in the mainland to say, okay, you're okay now, you have some camps, you have some accommodation schemes in the mainland, we can start sending people back, and they have started sending people back since 2017, and at the same time, continue to have such dire conditions on the islands and on the border so that they give the signal to people in Turkey that don't come here, we will make your lives hell. I mean, these are actual words that have gotten out of mouths of officials in Greece, like, don't come here. So the
learning from Trump also, like, it seems like there's also a kind of learning. I think it's Australian. Oh, Australian Trump. Right.
No, Australia is a model. Then Trump is learning.
Maybe Trump is learning from us. I don't know. I know that
Italy suffered from it first. It's interesting. I'm sorry, but it's the southern European countries in which the accord is actually being enacted.
Yeah. So it's the first line of externalization of border management are the South countries. Okay. The next one is what we discussed yesterday. But just which is the processing centers in Libya, in Morocco, like centers that would outsource the management of the population even further away. Because at the end of the day, and one thing, and I'm not trying to make any excuses for the Greek state or for the Greek people in any way. I mean, Sally knows it better than anyone, but in a way, the way Greek, let's say, all the Greek involved people manage the EU-Turkey deal right now is to make it not work. So in a way, there is some kind of resistance through some loopholes, and the Commission knows that this is not working. They're not enough. So there are two ways that you can leave from an island right now if you're an asylum seeker. The one is that you return back to Turkey. The other way is that you get a vulnerability paper. Because in the law of 2016 that incorporated the EU-Turkey deal into the Greek legislation, so the expedite border process, as we called it in the Greek legislation, there was a provision that people had to stay on the island until their asylum claim is examined and until the asylum officer can assess if Turkey is or is not a safer country for him, unless there is a vulnerability issue. So we have started spreading the vulnerability. It started from people trafficked and victims of torture, etc. And now we have been creating a PTSD industry of people getting out of the islands, because at the end of the day, the Greek authorities do not want to have so many people stranded here, because elections are coming as well. So and Mitidini locals are also voting. So they're taking people away through this vulnerability clause, which is very interesting, because now, people do not only have to get into the necessity clause, they have to go into the necessity and vulnerability, at the same time, in order to be able to leave the island. So it's they have on their backs a vulnerability thing, which then we have to work with when they come into the mainland. So, and on top of that, and I'm sorry, I'm trying to wrap up here. On top of that, we have the Evros reality. So Evros is the land border with Turkey. And Evros was excluded for the EU-Turkey deal. So the EU-Turkey deal only concerns the islands. And I'm sure you agree that they did not forget Evros. It is because at the same time, for me and for people working, our team is mostly working in the Evros. So this is where we have staff deployment. Evros is a whole different reality. They have lived with this problem forever, with this issue, not problem, baby issue, forever. I believe after all the field input that I have, that the reason they excluded Evros is because they needed to have a space with not a lot of spotlight. So because the hotspot approach means a lot of institutions and a lot of good paid officials, but at the same time means a lot of NGOs, a lot of services, activists, locals. Evros is a whole different discussion. Nobody's there. It's two people from us, one lawyer from Praxis, and 3 persons from Arsis, and this is the whole NGO field in Evros. Nothing else. Because Turkish nationals pass from Evros, because we have signed the EU-Turkey statement saying that Turkey is safe third country when Turkey is not safe for their own people at the same time. So this is, the whole, contradiction. The contradictions are so many. So Turkish people mostly pass from Evros. And of course, we cannot detain Turkish people, but we do not want them to be very, very visible. So we leave the whole situation as Turkish people passing by very quickly and getting wherever they want to go, if they're not pushed back. So Evros now, the pushing back people to Turkey has kind of become a new control management system. So people are being daily pushed back. The Commission comes out saying, I don't know, just ask the Greek authorities. The Greek authorities come out saying, these things never happen. It's exactly in exactly the same way that the hitting squads of Golden Dawn didn't happen back in 2011. In the exact way that the Golden Dawn hitting squads didn't happen back in 2011. These things do not happen. We have dozens of testimonies. We have videos. We have photographs. But still, for the Greek authorities, these things don't happen. So this is the reality. Of course, we're trying to do strategic litigation, but imagine a situation, I'm not trying to make any excuses now, but imagine that the third time that our lawyer called the local police station because we called the call from a Turkish journalist informing us that there was actually a pushback happening at that time. The third time, the official from the police station said, "Okay, how exactly do you have all this information? And you know that this might be smuggling." Like he actually said, close the eyes, said that I can actually prosecute you guys. So, because you have information about people which you are not allowed to have because these people are still in the border zone. So how do you have all this info? In the same way that people in Mytilene have been prosecuted. So this is the reality. So it's not exactly like Nauru and Manus Islands, but it's getting close to that. I think the most close to what we'll see in Manus and Nauru Islands will be the processing centers in North Africa. And just an anecdote, 2 years ago, I happened to be, because I remember that yesterday that I heard about your intervention. Just a couple of years ago, I happened to be in a panel in Brussels, and Gerhard Knaus was there. So Gerhard Knaus is from a think tank. He was very close to Merkel and to the chancellors in Germany, and he is actually presented as the architect of the EU-Turkey deal. So he was the one that actually conceived this very nice plan. Of course, he was attacked by everybody, like even from the cynical point of view, it's not working, people. And he responded that if the EU-Turkey deal does not work, then Lesbos will turn in Nauru and Manus. So he kind of tried to flip the argument around. So this is what's happening in the borders. In the mainland, it's also a very interesting discussion. Of course, you know that the Greek state never had some kind of integration plan, and at the same time, never had an integration plan for people, like from the 90s until now, never. So people are trying to make their way around the system. It is very difficult. There are no lessons. There are no Greek lessons. I mean, there is nothing to start from.
What do you do with the, I'm sorry, since you're talking, sir, what do you do with the argument that the Greek state is financially struggling and is going to squeeze right out of the EU on this question?
Well, I listen to it and I try to respond. I understand. It depends on who's saying the argument. If the argument comes by the ministry, I say, come on, guys. This is EU money. Give us a fucking break. If it comes from a person, like a normal, let's say, person, I try normal. Yeah, I do all this quite, from my mother. If my mother says that, I'm trying to make the argument of not distinguishing between them and us. They are people that are struggling to get integrated, most of them. And this is the people, we're working with actually in the field. And it's not an us and them. It's a whole society where, the inequalities have skyrocketed. And we have to think in another context. And the context is that they are working people like us. For example, we're doing campaigning, trying to give you one of the campaigning that we are doing as an NGO is that we are getting out stories of people, but in a way that is they're not trying to trigger the empathy. They're trying to trigger the very logistics of they are ordinary working people. They're struggling through the same system that we are struggling. They go to the IRS, they have the same problems, and some on top of them. And if we make their integration easier, we will make our lives better because they will not have to go into other solutions. By saying that, of course, I'm always saying that, it's a fact, they're here. Borders are filters, there's never been walls. And get on with this thing. We will never close the borders. Even if you want to close the borders, you cannot. So, this is a reality. I can say I don't like the rain, it will still keep raining. So you can say you don't like migration, migrants will still keep coming. So let's find a way that we all get better with each other. So this is the main argument that I make. And we as an NGO, and this is interesting maybe for the discussion afterwards, are doing some specific, strategic communication in trying to engage in the conversation what we are talking. And for the US guys, this might be sound familiar, the persuadable middle. So talking with people and to people that are not very polarized, but trying also to find, people that are conflicted and try to engage them as well in the process. What's interesting in Greece, and it's also different from other EU countries, not from Italy, Italy is the same, is that, and we're trying to talk with the authorities about that, like for the couple of years, and nobody's listening for some reason. We have now about 70,000 people in the mainland in Greece, okay, that have arrived after the 2015. That's the average number. From these 70,000 people, from the stats that we have from the asylum service, half of them will get asylum, half of them will not. Which is like understandable because, Germany and France and Sweden, through the relocation scheme, took the Syrians and the Iraqis, and Greece was left with all the other. So a lot of people who are now residing in Greece will not have a claim to asylum. There are legal pathways for them. We have trying to get the Greek state to implement these legal pathways forever. For some reason, they prefer to keep this population invisible, but this is one of the major stakes that the Greek state at some point will have to face. Because undocumented people mean invisible people without any right, means detention, but even detention, we don't have enough detention places. People cannot be returned for various reasons. We're trying to make the argument that you are not returning people anyway. You're not. If you could return, okay, I would go with the national sovereignty argument. But you don't. So why don't you try to keep them in a way that we can, that it's humane? And finally, just about the EU, that, most of you might know that there was a pending Dublin reform, like the fourth. It was stalled. It was self-destructed among the Visegrad countries and the South countries. The South countries said, come on, guys, this is not solidarity. This is another relocation program. The Visegrad countries said, we don't want any kind of refugee, so we don't care. And it also self-destructed, so that the pending Dublin regulation is not pending anymore. So what we live is a situation where by bypassing, and I think this is the most important thing to say, by bypassing its own mechanisms, Europe is trying to externalize border control even more. And having said that, I do believe, and I think this is a very good forum for that we need to find a new way to talk about, I don't know if it's displacement. I'm struggling with that since you raised it, because IDP, international displacement is also a way to keep people in other territories of the country. So I'm just struggling if it's the right concept. But the system is broken. Even the system that existed is broken, and I don't know. The emperor has no clothes. It's evident that the Commission does not have an idea of what's going on. At the same time, that the World Bank itself, like not any activist, the World Bank came out with a report like 2 months ago saying that by 2050 we will have at least 150 million displaced people just because of the climate change. Just because of the climate change, on top of all other. So, the whole thing is changing. And I do agree that we need to find a new way to talk about this issue without only putting the Geneva Convention in. I totally understand that for people working in the field, the Geneva Convention is kind of a totem. Like, if we open the Geneva Convention, they will abolish this as well. So let's not open the whole thing. I don't know if the good way is by proposing a new Geneva Convention, because they might just abolish the whole text. But we need to start talking in another way that incorporates the new developments. And I'm sorry I talked too much. Thank you so much for listening.